This is The Naked Life with Roxanne Noor. Hello, Viv.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for coming today to speak to me. Your profession is really interesting to me. So you are a mindfulness coach in the workplace, but then in the bedroom you help couples with mindful intimacy. And from what you've told me, you're really bridging the gap between these two and normalizing conversations around sexuality, intimacy itself, the erotic, and making it accessible to people and helping people to understand and navigate their bodies and their minds, which is beautiful. And you are also a TEDx speaker, which is super cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so I think a good way to start this conversation is what you would define intimacy as. Like, what is the bedrock of intimacy itself?
So interesting because I always ask this question to people who come to my sessions. And I've asked hundreds of people and no two definitions are the same. I would define intimacy as the essence of tapping into your vulnerability and into you. I see. So like you're seeing into a person and really opening up your inner world. Even for yourself. It's not just about connecting with another person, it's about being intimate with yourself first, actually.
Beautiful, yeah. And I love, because my primary profession is writing, and so I love looking up the etymology of words. And the etymology of intimacy comes from the Latin word intimus, which means innermost. And it was like you said, it's not that like we're close, it's like I'm letting you in. And then the etymology of vulnerability is the wound, actually, would be the translation. And it's interesting because Rumi has this saying, like, the wound is where the light enters, just paraphrasing. Yeah, and how both are so inextricably linked to one another.
Yeah.
So what do you see as ways or methods, this can be even things you've seen with your clients, that deter us or take us away from vulnerability? And what are some things you see that bring us closer to each other and allow vulnerability?
Okay, so the first part, what removes us from vulnerability? Fear, the biggest one, and it could be fear of not being loved, fear of abandonment, fear of getting hurt again. And it's this protectionism, it's this like survival mode that we have. And a lot of us have this autopilot of just blocking our feelings and blocking processing our feelings. And I've done this for most of my life. And it could be culturally, it could be religiously, or the way that you were brought up in your society, that you weren't taught to really be vulnerable. Because if you cried, you were looked at as weak, you were seen as weak. And so the way that we grew up and the way that we were conditioned determined how vulnerable we could be as an adult. And sometimes it's so hard to unlearn that. And it's so hard to get someone to be vulnerable when they don't even know how that feels like. Yeah. So on the flip side, what allows people to be vulnerable is like kind of like this, where you're being present. I feel seen, I feel heard, there's no judgment, there's no shame. And it's really the feeling seen, heard, and understood. Those are the main things that in my sessions I see that people then start to open up and become very vulnerable. And a lot of people get very emotional in my sessions as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And especially because we all have really specific childhood wounds or traumas or whatever word we want to use for it. And it's almost like we create a coping mechanism to survive as children, to deal with the love we did or didn't receive. And oftentimes it was received poorly. And what I see in myself actually is that helped me at that period in my life a lot. But I've just gotten used to it and carried along into my adult life. So the whole mechanism that I was using to cope with a love given poorly or just a lack of love to survive is now actually ruining my life. And I feel like a lot of people have this in what we feel like we need to just get through. And yeah, it's exactly what you said. It's fear the most. I was once in a healing session, and it was so beautiful what this man said. He was doing body work on me, and then he was just channeling, and one of the things that came through was, he said, what if there's nothing to protect? And I really went into that, like, what am I actually protecting? Because all the times that we create divisions and push away, it's like we're actually pushing away love so much of the time.
Yeah, oftentimes we push away love and we self-sabotage. When someone is trying to give you love, you're not open to receiving because you are trying to protect yourself so hard, even though there's no threat or there may not be a threat, but you're perceiving it and you're projecting it as a threat. So yeah, I love that. It's like, what if there's nothing to protect? And aren't we born to feel? We're so afraid to feel most of the time.
Yeah, and it's that feeling that actually brings us into what it means to be alive, and the whole pendulum swing of pain and pleasure, and it's just like this beautiful dance. And I feel like what I've seen, because I've also I've worked in tantric intimacy, and from what I've seen with people is when they're really in states of protecting themselves is when they feel the most dead inside, and it works for a few years until they just feel really empty and there's no sense of what it means to actually connect with people. And so I also wanted to ask you, when you say feeling seen, feeling heard, what are some really practical tools that you feel like you can give to couples, or any stories you've seen that are really extreme examples of not feeling seen and not feeling heard and then coming back to a place of connection?
Good question. So actual practices, I mean, the breath. It's so simple. It is the first thing that enters us when we are born and the last thing to leave us when we die. Yet growing up, nobody teaches us how to breathe properly, and most of us are not breathing properly. And when you're not breathing properly, you're constantly in this fight, flight, freeze, fawn state where your nervous system is like in this sympathetic way. So physiologically, by slowing down your breath, and then if you have a partner, breathe with your partner together. You don't even have to say anything, just being. Don't need to do, just be with each other. 2 minutes. Everyone has 2 minutes. If you don't have 2 minutes, 1 minute. 30 seconds. That's the time you need to just breathe together. And then you can regulate each other's nervous system. And then you're in the same frequency. So when you're in the same frequency, that's when you can also try, and we do this a lot on the island, which is eye gazing.
Yeah, second nature here.
Right? I did a workshop yesterday. I did my talk yesterday, and I got people to sit in front of each other, and I was explaining. I was like, don't worry, we're not going to eye gaze. I know we do this a lot on the island. But, for most people, it is so vulnerable to gaze at each other without talking. And a lot of couples get so awkward in my sessions in the beginning. They get all the giggles, and they blink a lot, and they And then when they really settle down into it, they're like, so even though we want to be seen, we don't allow ourselves to be seen most of the time. So taking, again, 2 minutes if you have, just to look at your partner without talking. And I also love doing this. If you don't want to do it, if you're listening to this, you probably like this kind of stuff. But if you're just listening to this podcast and you're like, this stuff is kind of new to me, a tip is, if you go to a restaurant, let's say you're going on a date with your partner, and you're gonna wait for your food or your drinks to arrive anyways. So instead of picking up your phone and looking at your messages, take that time when you're waiting for your order to come to look at your partner, to gaze. And it's the perfect time for you to just connect without speaking. So that's another way. Get yourself to be seen and see your partner.
And just piggybacking off of what you said, I feel like there's also something beautiful about creating a sense of actually being together. So for example, with my partner, we have a rule that when we're at dinner, we don't use our phones. Yeah, because it's about us. It's about actual time together and not in a passive state. So I would even say that for couples who want to get closer, like to have really intentional time together. And especially for married people, it's like you're just going through the day, basically all the household chores, the things that need to get done, but to have just time for each other, no phones, no conversation about the kids, nothing besides just being together is so important. And also to piggyback off what you said about the looking each other in the eye, I would say it's as important in the really painful moments as when you just want to bond and regulate each other. So I felt this in myself years ago, that when I was really angry and having a conversation with my partner, I would notice myself looking past them because I was so angry, or like kind of turning and looking away. And it's almost like this it's disassociating basically. But to have the really difficult conversations and look at each other in the eye and see each other's humanness, essentially, I think is really important as well.
And I love how you brought up disassociation, because we don't realize we're doing it because it's so uncomfortable. It's that we don't want to feel that discomfort. And so we avoid the discomfort by dissociating, by saying, I'm not going to deal with that, by just looking somewhere else or getting your mind somewhere else. But also, you have to make sure that when you want someone to be vulnerable, you want to connect with someone and make them feel seen and heard, is giving them the space. So, for example, couples come to me and they come and they're like, okay, we have problems communicating, so we don't have really like deep-rooted issues, but we just need better communication. I'm like, yeah, okay. So then usually what I do is I ninja them from behind, where I'm like asking them some questions, and then really then digging up the root of the problem, and then them finding out the root of the problem, and then they get into this state where they're like, oh my God, this is really what's the problem. I don't feel like I'm enough. I don't feel lovable. I don't feel like I can take care of her, all this stuff. And then the other partner has never seen this side of them before. So they will chime in immediately when they're in a vulnerable state, because they don't know how to hold space, emotional space, right? So another tip is what I can give is just pause. If you see your partner struggling with their emotions, be the person to just be silent. You don't have to respond. I know sometimes we just want to respond, but you just have to be there. Yeah, and I think a lot of couples don't know how to do that for each other. Let's literally just be silent and be present.
Yeah, there's something especially I see with men where they go into their problem-solving minds. And so instead of just holding space, which is actually part of what masculinity is just being there, is like the consciousness that surrounds the place, but they get into this mode of wanting to solve. And so a lot of the time a woman will be in a hyper emotional state, and instead of just listening, just holding that space, there's wanting to nurse it, or like, we can get you out of this state, basically. Look, we can do X, Y, and Z, and blah, 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 and not even letting the fullness of the expression come out, but almost just trying to neutralize it immediately.
Yeah, exactly. And this is interesting because I had it in the opposite in terms of gender. It was the husband who had that vulnerability, who never tapped into that vulnerability. And it was the wife who was like, I don't understand why he feels this way, because he's amazing and he looks so hot and he's so tall. Why doesn't he think he's enough? Like that kind of thing. And just trying to be like, you're so great, instead of validating what he's feeling right now. Yeah. And then she becomes in her masculine as well. She's not in her feminine, right?
Yep.
And so even it doesn't even matter which gender. Sometimes we tap into that masculine, feminine if we're so used to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. what you brought up too is this interplay of the psychological and the physical, and how they're both kind of affecting each other. So with the breathing, there's this regulating, which then allows you to just be more present together. With intimacy in general, and the way the body-mind works is that it's basically one organism. And so what do you feel like what is the process for you? Would you say in the beginning, when you're helping people to become more intimate with each other, it's actually tackling the psychological first to then get to the bedroom and the physical? Or with certain people, would you say like it's just they're not embodied maybe and it's too mental? And so what do you see as the interplay between the body and mind when helping people?
Very good question. So I always start with communication. And I always say communication equals lubrication. And I can't coin that term. I got it from another podcast, actually. Okay. But it's so true. So I find that, and it's interesting when you mention there's some people who are so in the mind and they're not embodied. I find that I do still have to talk to them to get to the mind level, to kind of pull out what's actually going on in the mind. Let's pull out the thoughts that are in there and see what you're actually believing, and is it true? And just because we have thoughts doesn't mean we have to believe everything we think. But that's part of the problem, is we think about all these negative things about ourselves that are not necessarily true. So then as I pull those things out, I get them to basically look at the things that they're thinking about and write it down and really then analyze. Like, what does this do? Does this benefit you, or does this negatively impact you? And we do this kind of release. If it doesn't impact you, we do a release. Sometimes we burn the piece of paper. Sometimes we like breathe it out. Then we get into the body. Then you inhale, get into the body and breathe in all the positive stuff. Exhale, all the negative stuff. So you're kind of like doing a double whammy here with the brain and the body. So after we do the communication, that's when I love the somatic of the body and working with yoni and lingam massage and tantra massage, because then a lot of times, even if they didn't have an emotional release during the communication, usually they have an emotional release when we work with the body and we do the massage. Yeah. And that really triggers a lot of memories the body had. Like, for example, the cervix. There's a lot of, people used to say to me, oh yeah, there's a lot of emotions trapped in the cervix. And before I did this workout, I was like, yeah, blah, 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 whatever, right? And when I started doing yoni massages and receiving them, and whenever we go into the cervix, like 8 times out of 10, something comes up. The body keeps the score, right? Like the book, the body keeps the score. So it could be having bad sex with a partner for 10 years and not speaking up. And it could be having premature penetration when they're not ready and feeling pain and soreness and ignoring it because they want to be pleasing their partners. And they don't know what they like, and they don't know what turns them on or how to turn themselves on. It could also be things like miscarriages and abortions and things that are trapped, or procedures and pap tests. You know, whenever we go get a pap test as females, it's like kind of like rape. It's like forced entry, and it's not pleasant. And a lot of these emotions gets harbored inside us that we've never processed before. We never even thought that that would be trauma, as in big T trauma, but trauma can be little t trauma. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with men as well, a lot of times with men, when we do prostate massage, they've never felt any sensations like that. Then there's so much shame about feeling good about it. Yeah, then there's all this self-doubt, like, wait a minute, am I homosexual? And there's shame about their sexuality, and they're so confused, and they're like, wait, I really miss this feeling, this is so pleasurable, and they've been married for many years, and they don't feel desired, so there's so much that comes up in the body. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, there were so many things to bridge off from. Yeah. Okay, let's start in the beginning. You talk about beliefs, and beliefs in general are never true. There's no objective truth in them. And so basically we're using beliefs as a placebo. Like we end up believing that they're true if we think it enough. And it's like you said, like just because I think it doesn't mean it's true, but there's something with repetition of the mind. If the thought is circling again and again and again, And then the external world, we use ways to validate it. So to really go into that, like you said, it's actually because we're all so mentally focused, it's actually making a lot of sense to start with the mind. And once it softens, then to go into the somatic experience of the body. And those are all the things that we probably even forgot about, all the things that we suppressed, all the things that we resent ourselves for, how you said it's all harbored there. And then when there's that release, it's not like it's a one-time thing either. It's like you get a yoni massage, but you could probably still get hundreds of them, and there's still stuff to let go of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think like the way, and if people who are listening who are like, wait, I don't know what yoni and lingam massage is, yoni and lingam are the divine symbols of female and male sexual pleasure and power. That includes the genitalia, and it's Sanskrit. And I love using these words instead of the word vagina or vulva or penis, because there's actually no one word in the English language that describes our female and male genitals in an empowering and all-encompassing way. So just a little background. So I love that, like just using that. And I totally forgot your question. What's your question?
It wasn't even a question. It was a statement about beliefs itself and working first actually with the mind to then get to the body.
Yeah.
And how the body is basically just the storehouse of all the things that we weren't even able to articulate, to express.
Yeah.
All the things that we've the littlest things, like you were saying, the tests that we get, the times that actually when I was 20 years old, I had sex with a guy when I didn't fully want to, or the times where you have sex to please your boyfriend, and all of these things that are just stored there. And so basically what I was saying was it's not just a one-time release.
Right.
That this work is like very, very consistent. It's like a full-time life thing.
Yes. That I remember what I wanted to say was, it's kind of like you going to a yoga class. You go to your first yoga class after never stepping room into a yoga studio, and you're like, this is new. The body feels different, okay? And then you come out of the yoga class, you feel amazing. The next day you feel a little sore, and then you don't do it for another week or two. You're like, wait a minute, I really like that feeling, so I'm gonna get back into the studio and do my practice again. And it's kind of like this consistency of doing a yoga practice and opening up parts of your body. Then you discover all these things, and then if you don't do it for a while, then you go back into your autopilot and your stress mode and your cortisol levels are high and your negative self-talk. Then you're just gonna be in that cycle, be in that negative loop, and keep believing everything that you think. But it's an awareness. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also, I guess, when people have these experiences in the beginning, it's like knowing that that part of you is actually so much more alive than you think. And that in itself opens up a gateway to how much this work actually matters, and how when it's ritualized, when it's not something you do once every 2 months, but it's something that you do with your partner and you do it every other day, or even in the small ways, like you said, eye gazing. It doesn't have to be receiving yoni or lingam massage, but yeah, how much these things matter. What are ways that, besides just the breathing, that you've seen really help people when they're feeling, you used a word I actually wanted to branch off on later. It's not coming to me right now, but basically when there's almost no connection, when you've taken your partner for granted, when it's been a long time that you've been together, when the relationship is feeling kind of sterile, how do you feel like, what is the base ground of doing the work then?
When the relationship is sterile, so first is have curiosity, have a growth mindset. Nobody teaches us about healthy intimacy growing up. And so who's going to teach you? Like, where are you learning from if you're not going to do your self-research, go to a tantra coach, go to a retreat, an intimacy coach? So first is having the curiosity to know that, actually, I know that we can step it up. Yeah. And wanting to grow together. And if you have one of those partners who are like really closed off, like I don't want to grow, because sometimes there are cases like that, then do the work for yourself. have your partner then witness the change and the benefits from your growth mindset and doing the work for yourself, right? And then after the curiosity is everything is kind of like an experiment. You're always experimenting, you're testing the waters, right? So I also love just sitting with each other in what we call the yab yum position in Tantra, which is usually it's the male sitting cross-legged and then the female would be straddling with legs wrapped around his hips and embracing one another, and again breathing together in a rhythm that feels good for both of you. And it's not just about breathing. We believe in energy. Everything has energy. You can touch everything. You can actually see energy. We do like a little exercise in one of my workshops where people are like, oh my God, this is real. So energy is real. When you're breathing together, you're transferring masculine, feminine energy. You're transferring just the essence, the aliveness of each other as well through your breathing, through your presence. So it's from your yoni, your lingam, to your heart space, to your crown, and then to them, and you're just circulating that. And that's a lot of times when I witness couples doing that, that's when they start to melt into each other. They become one. They unite into this oneness. Yeah, and it's really beautiful. So that's another practice, I would say, the yab yum position. And another practice that I would say that could really help is just to talk. Like, just to prompt each other with questions around intimacy. Talk about the intimacy. Aftercare is really important. After you have sex, however way you want to end sex. A lot of times we think after intimacy and sex, or sex and intimacy ends with ejaculation or orgasm, right? But you can end it in any way, and don't pass out or look at your phone, but instead aftercare. Hey babe, what did you like best about our intimate time? What would you like me to do more of next time, or what would you like to see more of next time? How can I help you be more present, or help myself be more present? How can I be more patient with you during intimacy? How can we give each other feedback without it having be a criticism? And what's the difference between feedback and criticism? And just having these healthy conversations, which a lot of people don't know how to have, and this is why they come to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something also beautiful. What I love the most actually about yab yum, especially in the beginning stages, and I would say actually a lot of the neo-tantric approach is this aspect of really slowing down. Yeah, and when I'm doing it, and a lot of the time I'll do this actually before I have sex. It's almost like a form of foreplay. If you're doing it naked and sitting on top of your lover, it just actually naturally becomes sex. The body becomes aroused, like when it can relax. When you can fully relax and be in this space beyond words. Yeah, and there's something so profound just about slowing down because of the way perception works and the fact that you can notice more. And I feel like especially being a woman and the way that we're indoctrinated a lot of times into sex, at least the way it was for me back when I lived in America, and my first few sexual partners was really like rough, fast sex. And it was a lot of the time because the guy was kind of numb, or he watched a lot of pornography, and this is what he thought sex was this really like pounding and
unconscious pounding.
Yeah, just like no, yeah, and you're going so fast, you're barely noticing what's going on, and it's just like this friction, this force. And I actually enjoy that kind of sex once I can be warmed up, and and the different pacing and rhythm. But there's something about being slow that allows perception and awareness to increase. So you're noticing your lover's hand on your hips. You're noticing the way the breath, that you're like almost drinking the other person, and it's just like awareness itself can expand so much more when we go slowly. So for me, this is actually what I love about a lot of tantric approaches to life, is just this slowness.
Thank you for bringing slowness, because to me, I'm like, of course it's like you have to go slow. To me, it's such a given now, but half the time I live in Hong Kong, and fast-paced city. It's all about efficiency. Everyone's like, can we do a session in an hour? Like, no, you cannot do a yoni massage in an hour. Things like that. And this is part of the problem, is we are always going at this pace that is so fast that our brains and our bodies cannot process it. So the rule of thumb is, if you think you're going slow, go 5 times slower, whether it's yab yum, whether it's breathing, whether it's eye gazing, whether it's touching, whether it's sex. And I exactly can resonate with you about like the pounding, right? You can have that after you relax the body, after you slow down, because then you're more receptive. You can receive more, and it's not going to be just pain and soreness, which is what a lot of my clients experience. Yeah.
And tying it into the beginning of our discussion, which was about vulnerability, even all the questions that you brought up from conversations that couples could have afterwards, in a sense is actually even vulnerable to say what you want more of, or to actually ask for something. Even that is like really difficult for many, many women that I've met, where it's like they want something and just vocalizing what they want puts them in a state of vulnerability.
Yeah, it's really hard for us to ask for what we want. And a lot of times we don't know what we want. I ask everyone this actually, what turns you on and how you turn yourself on. A lot of women get trumped on that question because they don't know what turns them. I have no clue, because I just please him. I just please my partner. I don't really focus on myself. And then when he does whatever he does, it's like, yeah, it's just good. It's good because that feels good. But they put a ceiling on their pleasure and on their turn-ons, and that's just and that's a fixed mindset. Right? And that could also come from like the underlying root causes. When we really peel the layers, it's from the conditioning from our childhood. It's from going to a religious school. It's from church, from previous partners who would like a good girl, close your legs, don't wear short skirts. Like we've been shamed for just being everything to everyone. And I just always say there's no winning.
Yeah.
Just be yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really it. And on the flip side as well, it's also hard for men to be vulnerable. So many times, it's like their idea of masculinity is the alpha, the strong alpha and the breadwinner. And them tapping into vulnerability is really hard because their fathers never showed them how it was to be vulnerable. They've never seen it. They've never felt it. Yeah. And so that's also really, I witness a lot of that as well. And it can be very painful for both parties.
Yeah. There's this post I saw on Twitter actually that was a black guy from the hood basically of New York, and he was talking about how the only time he felt vulnerable in his life or allowed another man to see him in vulnerability was when he had a son. Like it took that much. It wasn't his guy friends, it wasn't his own father, it was him rewriting that story of manhood, and it was having a child that allowed him to get to that level of being witnessed by a man and in pain, and all the ways in which we're taught to protect basically.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so hard for everyone. And that's why, Brené Brown, she's a researcher about vulnerability and shame and all of that. That's why this is all bubbling to the surface and people are now tapping it more into it. And I think that's also why people are more in tune with learning about intimacy as well. It's almost like this movement, which I'm really happy about, that people are really wanting to learn more about vulnerability.
Yeah, I feel like there's been a surge in like soft skills in life, actually. The things that we can't acquire just from going to school or university, but the things that life teaches us. Yeah.
That I like that you brought up soft skills, because I was looking at my Instagram reels and I find that the reels that had a lot of engagement were the ones that I wrote how to soften in the bedroom or how to become softer, and there's a lot of people who really want to be softer, which is so lovely. And I think softness can come in many different ways, but I think vulnerability is the primary kind of spotlight of softness.
Yeah. I've seen it in myself when I want something really badly from my partner or something out of the relationship, of whether it's a feeling or something we need to work on. I have an approach in my head of just like sometimes really brutally stating like what it is and being like very just direct. And I've noticed that the more and more I can actually soften, like in all levels, just like my voice, my voice softens when I touch the person, when I'm speaking about what it is I want, when all these elemental things, just, yeah, my body, the way I hold myself, when that softens, it's so much easier for me to actually get what I want, for it to be received in a way that it's not threatening. And you brought this up before, the difference between feedback and criticism. And that in itself is really important, the way in which we word things.
Yeah, the armor comes up, you know, when it's when we perceive it as criticism. The defense always comes up when it's this like, oh, the ego gets really shattered. And it's really important for people to understand that softness doesn't mean weakness. Like, we have to stop associating that. Softness is strength, really. It's bravery, it's courage. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to take a sharp turn in the conversation just because this is something I'm really interested in. In the work I've done, I've met many women who have said they have never had an orgasm. And I think actually the softness even plays into that, because it was being around men in which they couldn't soften, or a better word is actually they couldn't fully surrender because of not feeling fully psychologically safe and various different factors. But from the women you've seen who are able to become multi-orgasmic versus maybe your clients who have never had an orgasm in their lives, what differences do you see in terms of the way they navigate life or the bedroom? Like, how can women, for one, have an orgasm or help themselves to reach that state in which they can fully surrender? And then I guess the step after that we can go into is becoming multi-orgasmic.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I also see a lot, of this, where women are not having an orgasm, or not having an orgasm with their partner, and only having an orgasm with a vibrator.
Yes, okay,
Yes.
this is also a thing.
Yes, right?
Yeah.
Right? And so, okay, so this is the pattern that I see, that the women, what's blocking. So let's talk about what's blocking. Being a lot in their doing energy. They're always doing something. They're taking care of someone. They're doing things around the house. They're obviously at the workplace, doing things for the kids and the family, but they're not actually being. They're not slowing down. They're not pausing to just literally stop and smell the flowers. Like, I know it's such a simple and common saying, but literally stop and smell the flowers, and being aware and embodied with your surroundings. So, which ties into another thing, is they're disembodied. They're so disconnected because they're constantly in the brain, thinking and planning in their doing mode instead of their being mode. We're not human doings, we're human beings. And then the lack of education. If you think about sex education, if you're lucky to have it, we learn about male ejaculation, but nobody teaches us about female ejaculation. We learn about how not to get STIs, our menstrual cycle, and how to put on a condom, and that's maybe about it. So this we don't prioritize pleasure as part of our well-being. In fact, pleasure, self-pleasure, our sexuality should be the forefront of self-care and our well-being. That's what I think. And so the women who are getting these orgasms without a vibrator are the ones who prioritize their self-care and their sexuality and learning more and coming back to growth mindset. And also the safety. This is a big one. It's feeling safe, seen, heard, understood. The safety actually really comes first. And you mentioned psychological safety, emotional safety. So when, let's say, okay, we know how to be vulnerable as a woman, we're vulnerable, and then our partner gets defensive. Then we don't feel safe. They're blaming us for how we feel. That automatically, and then you choose to stay in a relationship like that. And of course, then if you don't feel safe, your body doesn't relax, your nervous system doesn't relax, you're not getting an orgasm because your nervous system is trying to help you survive. It's not going to prioritize your orgasm. Yeah. And women who go into nature. Yeah, I mean, we live on a beautiful island. It's a lot easier for us to get into nature. And if you're living in a city and if you're like, well, it's really cold right now, I can't get outside, at least have some sort of plants at home where you can really get in touch with, like, smell some flowers, touch the leaves. We are natural beings. We belong in nature, yet we are sitting in concrete boxes for most of our lives, right? So of course we're disconnected and dissociated from our bodies. And also spirituality, I think, really helps. You know, tantra actually means woven, to weave the spiritual and the physical. So if you think of your sexuality or intimacy and sex as more of the physical and you're not tapping into the spiritual, that's just half of the puzzle. Yeah. And it's okay to tap into that woo-woo side of your body and your mental well-being and your physical and sexual well-being. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful points. And yeah, just bringing it back to ourselves. I feel like there was a really, maybe we could share some stories actually on how this ties to. But yeah, it's so interesting because everything you said is actually so obvious, and I never deconstructed it in myself. Like what, because there was a huge change within me where I was living, literally exactly what you said. I was living in New York City and I was in a relationship with actually someone I really loved. And our sex life was just not amazing, basically. And then I moved to Taiwan and I was alone for a long period of time, and I was actually celibate purposefully. And so for 7 months I was celibate. Then I came to Thailand and I was living first in the mountains, and I was very connected to nature. I was for months sleeping in a tent actually. I was like really in the cycles of nature. And then I told myself that the next thing I would be in would be something where it's, going back to also to the slowness, where I would actually take my time. And where it would be about first like the spiritual connection I have with a person rather than just like the hedonism and having fun together and having sex really early. And the person I met, we didn't have sex for 3 months until we finally had sex. And that was a huge shift for me. Just like enormous, like the living in nature, the being versus doing. There were months where I actually wasn't working, and I was prioritizing going to vipassanas, meditation, a lot of yoga, all of these things, and it was like perfectly fated that I met him at this period in time. And it went from not being able to have an orgasm during sex with someone I loved beforehand to then meeting him, waiting, having sex once we really, really knew each other, and I felt that there was something beautiful happening. And then I became multi-orgasmic. And now it's gotten to the point that when I have sex with someone, it can be 9, 10 times. And it's actually not even about them. It's about that place that I've cultivated within myself.
And the safety you've cultivated within yourself as well through the learning. Through the process. That's so beautiful. And this is the thing, is that it's so holistic. I can't just give you like one tip for you to be multi-orgasmic, because you can't just use that one tip. And the slowness, like, yes, coming back to the slowness, is slowing down and not always having a goal. Don't look for the orgasm. Anytime you self-pleasure, anytime you're with your partner, you don't have to get to the orgasm. Because that's part of the problem. If you're listening to this and you're a female and you cannot orgasm, stop looking for it.
Yeah, that is so true.
Basically, that's the first thing. And the feminine is journey oriented. As females, we're so much in our masculine sometimes we forget the process, the journey, just enjoy the ride and just feel into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Are there any stories you want to share, anything you want to leave the audience with?
Yes. For myself, I heard about the energetic orgasm before and Sex Love Goop. For people who watched it, there's an episode with just people feeling energetic orgasms, and sometimes it's so hard to explain some of these experiences until you've experienced it. And so I was receiving a yoni massage, and then my partner stopped touching me at some point and was just breathing with me. And because I was so present and I was able to sublimate my energy and be so present in my body that I felt this surge of sensations, this energy rising from my yoni up to my heart, then through my throat and up to my crown. And I started laughing for 20, 30 seconds. And then I started crying uncontrollably for the rest of the time. And that was the moment that I realized I just had an energetic orgasm, because I felt so loved and so safe and so cared for and so seen. And there was no pressure to get to penetration. That was my favorite part, was there was no goal to get into penetrative sex, and I could just be. Yeah, it was incredible.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to also end this whole conversation is, yeah, all of this actually goes back to the way you live. It's the beingness in life. It's not even about the bedroom. Like the way we all live, our sense of being in the world will impact our intimacy, what we do in the bedroom, how much we can receive, all of these things, because it's not really just about our partner or the sex itself. It's about how we feel about life and our sense of just, yeah, being and relaxing into it. And that's something that we can try to teach, but I think what you said also earlier about living out that message. Yeah, it's not about waiting for the partner to change. It's not about fixating on orgasm. It's actually about the way we live.
Yeah, reconditioning yourself to being the person that you want to be. Because just to end this off, growing up, I never knew a relaxed woman growing up. And when I asked this question to a lot of females, if you've known a relaxed woman growing up, raise your hand. Usually it's 0.1% of people. And so relaxing into our lives and being can be so foreign, but it's absolutely doable.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you for your time and your wisdom and for coming here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.